If you run a RCFE or an ARF in California, or if you're thinking about opening one of those facilities, you've probably wondered what are the training requirements for the staff? What are the requirements to become an administrator? There's a lot of nuances with Title 22 and it can become confusing. And so this video will briefly cover some of the requirements, whether it's initial or ongoing for both the administrator certificate as well as for staff in both RCFEs and ARFs. So for first things first, the administrator certificate, it's different if you're an RCFE administrator or an ARF administrator. The RCFE administrator certificate requires 80 hours. 60 of those hours are either live or in person, typically over Zoom. And then 20 of those are going to be online, so sort of like a do it at your own pace kind of thing. And then once you finish that, you'll have to take the state exam and pass that. The renewal process, or what it takes to maintain the certificate, is 40 hours of CEUs every 2 years, so essentially 20 hours, and 8 of those must include some sort of dementia training. For an ARF administrator, there's a 35-hour certificate course. After you complete that, then you have to pass the state exam, same as with the RCFE Administrator certificate. And then again, the renewal is 40 hours of CEU every 2 years. And this includes 5 hours of HIV and TB training. If you want to have both certificates, you cannot just expect to take one and then automatically get the other. They're both individual and separate. And so you may have to, you have to take both to be dual certified. For staff in RCFEs, they are required to have 40 hours of training. The first 20 hours are needing to be completed before they start working or relatively immediate once they start working. 6 hours must include dementia care related training, and then 4 hours of that must be postural or first aid / CPR related. The next 20 hours are having to be done within 4 weeks of the staff beginning work. And then typically that involves, if they're going to deal with medications, 10 hours of medication training for a facility with 1 to 15 residents, and then 24 hours of training for anything above 16 residents. And then again, there are hours that are required continually. There's 20 hours of training required per year for that staff to maintain compliance, including 8 hours of dementia care. For ARFs, they're a little bit different in terms of the regulations. That is because not only are they needing to be compliant with licensing, whether your facility is vendored is a big deal in the process. They are going to require your staff to be a direct support professional, which requires a different amount and type of training. They do have to comply with Title 22. They have to have a first aid and a CPR certificate up to date, as well as on-the-job training and nutrition, care and medications, those things. But what's most important is a DSP-1. So if you hire them within the first year, they have to complete 35 hours of training. I'll include the link to the training manual or what's required in the description. But then year 2, they're required to get another 35 hours. So now they can become a DSP2. It's a little bit more extensive. They're doing things that require a little bit more training than if you were just in an RCFE. Here is a list of some of the minimum staff requirements. I won't run through them all. Again, there will be a link in the description, but there's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about hiring a staff. Do they have a current first aid certificate? Can they pass a criminal record clearance? Different things like that are essential as you consider which staff to hire or not to hire. The last part of this is, what are some of the mandatory training topics? I've kind of mentioned this in the beginning, but first aid and CPR, they must have these prior to providing any sort of care. And then in an RCFE, they have to have 12 hours of initial dementia. 6 of those have to be before they start working, and then 8 hours of annual reoccurring training on that. For the postural supports, ARFs, you don't need to do this, primarily because this is mainly for maybe hospice individuals or people who are very, very dependent on staff. And so that requires 4 hours of initial training and then 4 hours of annual training. Medication management, again, the 10 hours if you're under 15 and the 24 if you're over 16. There's a lot to be considered when thinking about hiring staff and what sort of trainings they may or may not need. And so we would recommend that you turn to a vendored CEU course or administrative course. We'll link some in the description here that we've worked with, that we trust. But it's also important to talk with them and make sure that your staff, whether you're hiring new staff or whether you have current staff, is in compliance, because that's a big thing that licensing will look for, as well as each of the regional centers. Hopefully this is helpful. Thanks.